facilities. To that end, it was more convenient if everything currently here was razed to the ground. The kingdom's citizens were just as much of an inconvenience. They were unreasonably loyal to their idiot of a king and would no doubt spark civil unrest under the empire's rule. For those reasons, they needed to die. Only a select few would be allowed to live, and only because the emperor wanted to make his relief troops' pretext seem more believable. He could always order their deaths later down the line, anyway. Still, as ruthless as the emperor was, he did feel some regret over the destruction of the kingdom's capital. The city's complete annihilation would leave the troves of dungeon relics collected over the nation's long history and stored in the royal castle's vaults buried under all the rubble. Some would be recoverable, but others would almost certainly be broken beyond repair. Indeed, he regretted the loss, but he also wrote it off as unavoidable. Besides, if that cunning idiot of a king hadn't made much use of them, they probably didn't have much practical value. Although, losing the Black Blade truly pains me. The Black Blade had been retrieved from the deepest known lair of the Dungeon of the Lost and was the one thing the Emperor genuinely regretted having to sacrifice. It was a dungeon relic in a class of its own, made of an unknown metal that no substance or spell could even scratch. If the mystery of its composition or creation process were to be unraveled, the world's weapons and military equipment would advance by leaps and bounds. The possibilities were endless: armor that could stop any weapon or spell, blades that could slice through dragon scales, and even theoretical magical artillery, which no known metal could support, that could wipe entire cities off the map. All things considered, the Black Blade contained the power to change the world. If the emperor could just acquire it, he would be able to start a genuine societal revolution. If he could successfully analyze and reproduce it, the creation of an invincible army would no longer be a dream. Truly, it was a great loss. The peerless relic's misfortune had carried it straight into the hands of that ignorant fool of a king. Time and time again, the emperor had made King Clays an offer for the Black Blade, but the pig-headed man only ever refused. Even a request to simply look at the weapon had been denied. Now that a crisis was on the kingdom's doorstep, the buffoon had likely hidden the relic somewhere it would never be found. If so, its latent potential would go entirely wasted, lost in the mists of time. But the emperor had taken that into consideration. Even if he couldn't find the Black Blade amid the debris, he would at least have its source, the Dungeon of the Lost. The monstrously strong citizens of the kingdom had dedicated hundreds of years to exploring its depths, but even now, much of it was still uncharted. It was entirely possible that below its deepest known layers slept relics made of similar materials to the Black Blade. If the emperor sent his forces, armed with their advanced weaponry, to explore the dungeon and excavate every relic waiting in its depths, then finding what he wanted wouldn't be so hard. Perhaps the world's oldest dungeon housed relics even more preposterous than the Black Blade. If so, then the empire would stride even more confidently into the future, and the entire world would reap the unfathomable benefits. King Clays, the fool, still couldn't understand that. He had responded to every one of the emperor's kind propositions with flat refusal, which was why the emperor would annihilate him. His followers would die too, without question. The idiot king's seat of power would crumble away, as would its insignificant history, and become nothing more than a memory. The empire planned to wipe the slate clean. It would serve as a fine demonstration for the other nations. History does not require multiple narrators, the emperor mused aloud. One truth is enough. Henceforth, the history books would speak only of the empire's triumph. Truth was decided by the victor, and as long as the empire was around to testify to the details, that was enough. Nobody else was necessary. If any of the kingdom's citizens somehow managed to survive, the emperor would forcibly silence them and sell them off as slaves. He had already reached an agreement with the head of Sansa's Merchants Guild. They would purchase all the refugees he could round up and seal any loose lips among them. That said, I thought the destruction would be more thorough. As the wind cleared away the dust hanging over the capital, the emperor was afforded a better view of his target. He'd watched as the dragon descended on the idiot king's city, and while its rampage had only been short, it had certainly been violent. How, then, was only a quarter of the area in ruin? The emperor had hoped for a wholesale massacre of the city's populace, but, in a disappointing turn of events, it appeared that more than half of them were still alive. If that didn't change soon, the imperial army would be forced to stamp out a considerable number of rebel forces. It would be somewhat tedious, but at the same time, it should be fun, in its own way. A smile crept onto the emperor's face as he stroked his white-streaked mustache. On the horizon was a delightfully one-sided slaughter. Adventurers from all over the world gathered in the kingdom, but they were rabble all the same. Even together, they were no match for the imperial army and its arsenal of magical weaponry. Still, there were a few among the emperor's opponents who caused him a little concern, the veterans who'd developed an array of high-class skills and possessed what was frankly an abnormal degree of strength. And nobody exemplified those traits more than the 6 sovereigns: Sigurd the Thousand Blades, Dandalg the Immortal, Kru the Reaper, Heaven's Baumayan, 9 Speloken Sane, the Demonic Saint. Each and every one of them was a genuine monster. Then there were Ins the Divine Shield, protege of the Immortal, and Gilbert the Dragon Slayer, right hand to Sigurd the Thousand Blades. Plus, if the rumors were true, the current prince and princess were becoming fearsome in their own right. Finally, loath as the emperor was to admit it, the idiot king was another force to be reckoned with. It had been the man's unrivaled might, barbaric as it was, that had allowed him to act so arrogantly toward the empire. The emperor found it irritating that these individuals possessed such monstrous strength. Thanks to them, the kingdom of clays had been able to maintain its independence. However, that ends today. A new age approaches. In his journey to this point, the emperor had trampled over many other dungeon-possessing territories. He'd conscripted droves of the empire's poor, equipped them with mass-produced, state-of-the-art magical equipment developed from research into dungeon relics, and given them a direction in which to march. That was all it had taken to break the nations and armies that opposed him. Military might was now defined not by training or discipline but by the strength born from intellect. The proof was in the 10,000 soldiers at the emperor's disposal. During its invasions of other nations, the empire had needed only 1,000 troops to achieve its goals. This, however, was a special occasion. The emperor considered it a demonstration to the world, advertising the birth of the mightiest army in existence. That was why the soldiers were all outfitted with the latest equipment. People would speak forevermore of the fate that awaited anybody foolish enough to defy the magic empire. After this show of power, none of its surviving opponents would ever attempt defiance again. Indeed, this is an exhibition. Using its cutting-edge developments in magical science, the empire would slay the millennia-old symbol of terror that was the Dragon of Calamity and seize control of the foolish, tradition-bound kingdom of clays. Alongside the tale of the idiot king who brought about his own disgraceful end, the emperor would announce to the world that legends were nothing more than a relic of the past. Your Imperial Majesty, look. What? The emperor gazed in the direction indicated by one of his imperial guards, who had been standing by his side, and saw the figures of a group of people. Upon looking through his farsight magical tool, he made one out to be a woman clad in silver armor. She was glaring straight in his direction. Evidently, she had already used uncover on their concealment, covering the imperial army. Who's that? Ins, Your Imperial Majesty, the Divine Shield. There's no doubt about it. The emperor clicked his tongue. So she was here after all. The Divine Shield was a living legend, famous all across the world. As her title implied, she had been bestowed with the gift of a god, and as expected of someone described as divine, she was even more of a monster than the 6 sovereigns. Unarmed and unarmored, she could guard against a dragon's breath and slice clean through orichalcum. If she was in the capital, then it was no wonder the Dragon of Calamity hadn't achieved much. In fact, this may be the perfect opportunity. Even a monster like the Divine Shield was a thing of the past. The age where legends reigned supreme was already over, and the age of intellect had begun. Use Bryonak. Yes, Your Imperial Majesty. The Divine Shield possessed a useful ability, one that the greedy emperor longed to take for himself. Unfortunately, she was a follower of that nuisance of a king. Convincing her to cast aside her loyalty would be no easy task. The emperor had even considered brainwashing her, But after pondering the idea a little more, he had concluded that it simply wasn't worth the effort. It was a shame, but he'd just have to kill her. Bryonak, the Spear of Light. It was the pinnacle of the Empire's research into magical weapons, capable of burning through the Dragon of Calamity. The Emperor's army had brought four to this battlefield, and they were about to fire their second. The divine shield could produce light that was said to be invincible, but that was inconsequential when the blistering heat of their Bryonak would erase her from existence. Here and now, the Emperor would personally fell yet another legend. Despite her peerless beauty and seemingly limitless strength, the monster would meet oblivion after just one of his commands. Such joy. I simply can't get enough of war. The Emperor loved watching the annihilation of cities with long and treasured histories. He loved watching people be trampled underfoot. And most of all, he loved subjugating those whom he disliked, especially when he could have them brought to their knees or destroyed. His pulse raced at the prospect of putting King Clays through the same torture. His long-awaited desire was about to be sated. It was a shame that he wouldn't get to see the idiot king's last, bitter expression, but he wouldn't lose any sleep over it. Results were paramount, and as it stood, he had achieved complete victory. That was all he needed. Then again, if the idiot king had one strength, it was his sturdiness. It was entirely possible that he would find one way or another to cling to his meager existence. The Emperor took a moment to consider what he'd do in the event of the king's survival. Perhaps he would sever his limbs and keep him in the dungeons of the imperial court as a pet. That way, the fool could spend the rest of his days regretting his defiance. Putting him through every form of torture imaginable was another appealing option. Yes, that was the better choice. He would reduce the king to a sniveling, groveling mess. As he thought about what he would do after laying waste to the royal capital, the Emperor chuckled with growing amusement. The weapon is ready, Your Imperial Majesty. Fire. He gave the order to his vassal without hesitation. At once, Bryonak's merciless light, a tremendous wealth of mana refined and amplified by an ultra-high purity demon's heart, gathered in the barrel of the cannon. Then, it shot toward the capital as a single ray of crimson light. This is the end. The Emperor's face twisted in delight as he watched the ruinous beam surge straight toward the divine shield and parry and then veer off at an unthinkable angle. An unknown man had jumped in its path at the very last moment, and now the crimson light was soaring up into the sky. Chapter 38, A Tide of Silver. After parrying the red light that had suddenly come flying toward us, I stared in the direction it had come from. That was close. What was that thing? And what's with that crowd over there? It sure is big. On the eastern plains, opposite the side of the city where the dragon had rampaged, I could see a massive group of people. Lin's uncover had revealed them. They were all clad in dark purple armor and armed with long silver swords and shining red shields. They were also in an orderly formation and seemed to be gradually advancing toward us. It appears the Magic Empire has mobilized its army, Lin replied. Her tone was somber, and the blood had drained from her face. It looks like there are several thousand of them. No, more than 10,000. Perhaps. There are too many for me to count. The Empire's army? What were they doing here? This whole situation had me completely bewildered. Come to think of it, what's wrong with the city? I asked. What happened here? I had been too panicked to notice before, but we were all alone in the capital. The streets were usually bustling with people until the early hours of the morning, but now, it felt like the entire city was empty. We happened across my brother's subordinates on our way here, Lin said. They told us a little bit about the situation. Apparently, monsters appeared all over the capital, and the citizens have been evacuated to the western districts, where things are relatively safer. I believe the city's soldiers are busy coordinating the effort. That's so? No wonder I haven't seen anyone. Still, for monsters to be popping up all over the city. What was going on? That said, I assume they saw that intense light from a moment ago. Lin continued, staring at the massive group of armed soldiers in the distance. Reinforcements should be on their way, but it might be some time before they reach us. And even if they do come, the city's standing army isn't nearly enough to beat such a large host. Lin stepped forward to stand in front of Lin. This is as far as we go, my lady. We must fall back. We're simply no match for an army of that scale. You're right. We'll withdraw and join up with my brother. What about you, instructor? Me? Why even ask? With everything that's happening, my answer should be pretty obvious. I was, of course, planning to run away with them. I didn't even think the alternative was an option. Lin had phrased her question in a pretty strange way, though. It was almost as if she thought me staying here alone was a perfectly valid course of action. Just who did she think I was? You're right, Lin said, smiling. It was a stupid question. Oh, good. She understood me. Wait, she did understand me, right? Just to be safe, I decided to say my intentions loud and clear. Yeah, I'm going to Ru, incoming. Lin suddenly cried. Get behind me. I followed her gaze and saw a deluge of purple-red spheres flying through the air, getting closer and closer. At a guess, they were some kind of spell, fired by the massive army in the distance. Divine Shield. Just as the storm of spheres began to rain down on us, Ins created one of her shields. She had managed to protect us, but damn. Ins cursed. Were pinned down. The magic spheres now crashed down on us like a torrential downpour, not letting up for a second. In no time at all, the ground around us was gouged away, cutting off our escape. We were well and truly stuck. Lin scanned our surroundings, looking anxious. This is my fault, she said, as soon as we saw that army. Our top priority should have been to run. I was feeling pretty lost myself, but before I could even attempt to get my bearings, Roller let out a cry. Look, there's another light. I turned to where he was pointing and saw another crimson ray flying toward us. This time, I also saw where it had come from, a massive black tube covered in complex-looking engravings. If we didn't react, we'll get hit by the same thing that brought down that huge dragon. Another one, it's coming. Lin was staring at the oncoming light, looking even paler than before. I guess I didn't have a choice. Stealing my resolve, I took a step forward. Instructor, what are you doing? If we don't have a way out, then we'll just have to make one by force, if that's what it takes. We had already seen that my sword could deflect these attacks, though I didn't know how, so I needed to be at the very front of our group. Make one, but how? I'll go out and run around for a bit. That should give you three some time to get away. But, instructor, Lin looked at me uneasily. To be honest, I wasn't feeling all too great about this either. Still, while I was useless in a fight, I was pretty used to running around. Back on the mountain where I was raised, I'd often angered the local birds by stealing their eggs for dinner. They would attack me, of course, but getting away from them wasn't too hard. The same went for the swarms of venomous bees after I stole their deliciously sugary hives. I always managed to escape unscathed. As long as I ran for my life, I was sure I could outrun this massive army too. Don't worry, I won't do anything crazy, I said. I plan on making it back in one piece. I wasn't going to rush straight into the enemy's ranks and start fighting them or anything like that. Distracting them was the best I could manage. Against that ceaseless rain of spells, buying time was my only option. It was worth a shot, I thought. Pulling this off would give my companions an opportunity to escape, and as Lin had said, the city's soldiers would come to my rescue sooner or later. Maybe I was being overly optimistic, but I only had this one basket, so in went all of my eggs. Understood, instructor, Lin said. But please allow me to help you, even if my assistance might not be worth much. Sure. Go for it. Lin gently placed a hand on my back and started preparing some kind of spell. It was probably defensive magic, so my hopes were high. Okay. Prepare for impact.